A world away from West Virginia, the tech pioneers of Silicon Valley have also been responding to Trump's triumph while considering the role that the proliferation of fake news on social media might have played in delivering it. Gabriel Gatehouse begins his report with some anti-Trump protesters in Oakland, California.
They're still counting the votes here in California. By the time they're done, Hillary Clinton will likely end up with a commanding lead in the popular vote nationwide.
We reject the president-elect. We reject the president-elect.
It won't make any difference. Donald Trump is this country's next president. And here in liberal Oakland, many can barely put their feelings into words.
Right on.
It's been really difficult. I felt very angry.
What have you learned about America from this election?
That there are many lives that are not valued.
California is a strange mix, a place of hippies and tycoons, of idealism and pragmatism. A place where counterculture becomes the mainstream and then takes over the world. Nowhere are these contradictions more stark than in the heart of Silicon Valley's colossal tech industry. Facebook, the company that began in a student bedroom, is now so powerful that some people are saying it influenced the outcome of the presidential election. They call their offices a campus. To work at Facebook is to be part of something bigger than just a social networking site. If you were to encapsulate the Facebook ethos, what is it?
Well, our mission is to make the world more open and connected.
Right, open and connected is the Facebook credo. Has any of this election kind of made you feel differently about how that's working?
Oh, I can comment about that.
Right, fair enough. Facebook's news feed is used by 150 million Americans. There are no editors who decide what stories are published. Content is posted by its users. And during the election, it shared some high-profile pro-Trump stories that turned out to be fake. Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, says the idea that those stories decided the election is pretty crazy. But the company is working to find ways to filter out fake news. The Facebook mantra is all about being open and connected, but the truth is, in there, they're really quite nervous. They let us into film, it's great, but they wouldn't give us anyone to interview. They didn't even want me to talk into camera on campus. The election of Donald Trump has wrong-footed Silicon Valley, and everyone is waiting to see what happens next.
I think there's a lot of reasons why Trump won, but I think that is one of them. I think fake news on Facebook is a real issue, and it's one of the things that has helped further divide our country through the filter bubbles that we have.
The filter bubble is very much on people's minds, not just at Facebook, but among the smaller tech entrepreneurs too. It's an algorithm that decides what stories you see based on what it thinks you'll like. The more you like stuff, the more money a company like Facebook makes through advertising. But what about the utopian ideal of using tech to make people more open and connected?
It is being both connected and disconnected. It is enabling us to connect even more deeply with people who think like us, and it's also disconnecting us from opposing points of views and values. Unfortunately, this is one giant step towards more of a dystopian future. I don't think that's the end of the game. That innovation and I think history is a drunken walk. But I think it says that technology and these social platforms are really, really powerful, and we really need to think about what their effects are, both for good and for bad.
San Francisco is a world away from the towns of the Rust Belt and the rural Midwest, where Donald Trump won the presidency. The dynamism of Silicon Valley is creating vast wealth, as well as vast inequality. It's a culture based on liberalism, both social and economic. But at the very top of the food chain, where the big money is made, it's also intensely pragmatic.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was thinking that it was a landslide for Hillary, and it ended up being very different.
Are you worried?
No, I actually am excited by the opportunity that is created by having a maverick in the office.
Some of his policies must be anathema to you, though. Protectionist policies, building walls.
Right.
That's not what you're into, right?
Right. I'm an international businessman, and I have connections with people all over the world.
Tim Draper is one of the biggest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, with companies like Skype and Hotmail to his name. A lot of people who voted for Donald Trump basically said they were voting against a country run by a global elite. That's you, isn't it?
No, I don't think I'm global anything. No? I mean, I think I'm global, but I'm not elite.
Really? You're a venture
no,
capitalist with hundreds of millions of dollars at your disposal.
No, I think we really look at it as, you know, now we got a new president, and I think he creates kind of a new opportunity for us.
Silicon Valley is recalibrating. Its tech entrepreneurs expanded the horizons of human interaction, but it turned out they had little idea of what people were really thinking on the other side of their smartphone screens across America.
Well, joining me now from Portland, Oregon is Micah White, a founder of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and in the studio, Lord Skidelsky, the economic historian and biographer, of course, of John Maynard Keynes, and Guardian columnist Hadley Freeman. Micah, I'll begin with you, if I may. Occupy Wall Street perhaps came a little bit too soon. Is this the moment for street protests to change the face of politics?
Well, actually, I think that what we're seeing is that street protest is broken. I think that the realization that we're having is that we've been spending years, I mean, Black Lives Matter, 3 years, and we've been, since Occupy Wall Street's 5 years, of doing these street protests that we're now seeing don't work. I think that we need to start developing a way of using street protests in order to actually gain sovereignty rather than just creating disruptions. I think that's the real realization.
So, in a way, then, perhaps Donald Trump stole some of your shtick. He kind of managed to harness that populist feeling, but there was a proper political destination at the end of it.
I think that's right. I think that Occupy Wall Street basically represented this nascent possibility for the left and the right to work together. And you saw a lot of right-wing people in Occupy. But when the progressive elite basically smashed our movement, you know, the left wing went towards more street protests like Black Lives Matter, and the right wing went towards a populist maverick candidate. And in the end, the electoral strategy was correct. These street protests haven't gotten us any closer to having power, whereas backing a electoral strategy actually works. So now I think that the left has to figure out how to use social movements to win elections. That's the real challenge that we're at right now. How do we sweep elections in 2 years?
An American Podemos, then, or Syriza, perhaps?
Absolutely, or five-star movement. Basically, the idea is using the techniques of social movement creation, using the techniques of decentralized decision-making to figure out how do we build an actual people's movement that can win elections in this country. That is the absolute greatest task that we need right now, and I think that Donald Trump represents a kind of revolutionary wake-up call to all the people in the streets for them to basically, you know, let's innovate, guys.
Okay.
We got to do more than just street protests.
Micah, thank you. Hadley Freeman, you lost, get over it, is one of the slogans being chanted. Admittedly, some of the people chanting it are waving Confederate flags that refer back to a war they lost in 1865. But the message is Well, it's got momentum, hasn't it?
It's certainly got momentum, but the idea that people should just get over that underestimates what this election is. This is not a normal election. This is the election of a president who's endorsed by the KKK, who's announced as his chief strategist, the head of Breitbart News. Now, I've already seen in one of the British newspapers tomorrow a columnist describing Breitbart News as merely a media outlet that fights against Islamic violence and terrorism. Yes. And that's the only reason it's called racist. That's not the reason it's called racist. It's because it has articles saying that immigrants bring disease to America. It's because it's an anti-Semitic publication. This should not be treated as a normal election. People should be angry and protesting.
It's a very normal election in the sense that it delivered a clear victor.
Well, yes.
That is normalising his victory, whether you like it or not.
Absolutely, but most elections don't then result in the KKK holding victory parades through America.
There are a lot of comments involving accusations of fascism, Robert Skidelsky. Do you think they hold any water?
I don't think they do. I don't think this is a fascist takeover or even the beginning of one. I think the circumstances are very, very different, and America is very, very different. And first of all, America has a constitution. And although the president may appear very, very powerful abroad, within America itself, her powers are quite limited.
Everybody will hope you're right, of course they will, but why do you think so many fascists think he is one of them?
Well, we're into problems of definition here. I think
briefly, the fellow who came up with this phrase, alt-right, and some of the people that Hadley has mentioned, the fellow who came up with the phrase alt-right, I think, has said today that a lot of the people wearing Trump baseball caps might as well have been sporting swastikas.
Yeah, but they didn't have a chance to support swastikas, and that's why they don't support them. I mean, you have to judge everything by the circumstances, the country in which these... There is a common movement, there's a common disenchantment with what are called the liberal elites, and that takes different forms. Do I know what that means? Well, one definition was the financial elite and Wall Street, but there's also maybe liberal cultural attitudes, and there's also the feeling that the liberals have let down people, that they've left a lot of the country behind. They've treated them with contempt. They haven't taken any real...
And they haven't changed their lives. It's an overreaction then, Hadley Freeman.
I think we need to be very careful about this idea that this is a fight back against the elite. I mean, this is a man who's a Manhattan billionaire, who's worked with Wall Street for decades, who ran on a campaign that victimized minorities, women, LGBT and Jewish people. The idea that this is a fight against the elites is erroneous. It's the oldest prejudices in the world repackaged with a new name of alt-right.
So, Robert, I'm thinking Hadley sees this as scorched earth. In a sense, there's a danger that liberal democracy is to be brought to a flattened earth. You, if I'm understanding you correctly, you see it more as an opportunity perhaps to knock the house down and then rebuild something even better with the surviving bricks and mortar.
Not knock the house down. I mean, I don't think you can ever deliberately will a total disruption of a society.
He's kind of said he's going to, hasn't he, in a way?
Well, you've got to wait to see what he does. I think he'll be hemmed in by a lot of restraints. He hasn't got behind him the kind of militarized political party that these fascist groups have, and that's why it's quite dangerous to use the word fascist about them. Fascism was in a particular history. The mood may be very, very different, but it's may be the same, but its expression is different, and that is hugely important. And in America, particularly, there's nothing like any organised fascism. What you have is a president who many people think had a lot of crazy views, deeply unpleasant views in many respects, but also has economic policies that make sense to a lot of people.
OK, but very briefly, can you think of any examples from history of someone who's risen to power on a racist ticket and then turned out to be less racist once they'd achieved power?
Well,
I'm putting you on the spot. It's probably not fair. I'll give you another chance.
I do actually. I can think of people. I mean, one very, very well-known person from history was the mayor of Vienna, who was elected on a very anti-Semitic platform before the First World War, ended up by appointing lots of Jews to his administration, declared, and said, I decide who's a Jew.
See,
okay,
that's why you're the Lord. Thank you. Micah, back to you, if I may. The poignant moment in one of our films earlier, I saw a young woman describe people of colour feeling now as if their lives in America are worth less than she thought they were before. Is that a little hysterical?
I don't think it's hysterical, and actually I take a lot of issue with what your other guest was saying. I think that people misunderestimated Trump during his campaign, misunderestimated him during the election, and now they want to they want to say he's not going to be as bad as he says during his presidency. I think that actually the situation is much darker than anyone is really talking about. I think that he is a racist and he is a misogynist, and I think that he's a maverick and an unpredictable person. So I think that what we need to do moving forward, though, is imagine, well, how are the people going to gain power? Rather than just complaining about it or arguing with who's to blame, I think we need to take it very seriously, but in order to take it seriously, we need to actually create a plan for capturing
I'm sorry
sovereignty.
to interrupt you, but what if the people have just gained power?
I don't know. The difference here is that what we have put into power is an authoritarian leader who believes that his will is the correct will. What we learned during Occupy Wall Street and what we're learning with Podemos and the Five Star Movement is that we want to create a political party that gives power actually to the people so that they can make decisions as a group. If Donald Trump was talking about holding nationwide town hall meetings or community gatherings to decide what should we do moving forward, I'd be all about it. I mean, I love anti-establishment. I think he's absolutely right about so much stuff. But where he's wrong is how power will function in America. It's a regression to give power to an authoritarian in America.
Very briefly, is there anything he could do quite quickly that would reassure you?
Absolutely. I think that if he didn't just do lip service to populism, but actually started to articulate a vision of populist democracy, like where we have town hall meetings, where we have discussions among the community, and where he says that his power won't be just him deciding at the top, but instead that he is going to imagine a new form of democracy moving forward that ousts the elites.
Micah, thank you. Hadley, are you reassured by that? Is there anything that would reassure you further?
What would reassure me further is if he wasn't having Steve Bannon working for him as his chief strategist. I mean, for his first move to hire the guy from Breitbart News. I mean, that's just a kick in the face to all of Trump's apologists who say he'll be a different president than he was a candidate. He has proved he's going to be exactly the president that he was as a candidate.
Mika White, Hadley Freeman, Lord Skidelsky, many thanks indeed for your time. Now, it's not been a good few months for the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. In August, the inquiry's third chair, Lowell Goddard, resigned. In September, we saw the suspension and subsequent resignation of the inquiry's lead counsel, Ben Emmerson. A few weeks ago, Newsnight reported that the inquiry had dropped their investigation into him being aware of an accusation of sexual assault against him, an accusation he strongly denies. Other senior lawyers have resigned too, and it doesn't sound like things are getting much better. Jake Morris has been following every troubling twist of this tale, and he joins me now. Jake, what have you learned?
Well, as you say, the inquiry has had a pretty torrid time of late, James. I've learnt that another barrister has quit. Her name is Aileen McColgan. She was the lead lawyer responsible for two of the inquiry's investigatory strands, the investigations into the Catholic Church and the investigation into the Anglican Church. She's also a professor of law at King's College London. Now, what's significant about her resignation is that I understand she's resigned because of concerns over the competency of the leadership of the inquiry, and in particular, the way they've dealt with the departure of other lawyers on the inquiry. Now, I've also learnt that two other lawyers have told the inquiry of their desire to leave it, and again, they share broadly similar concerns about the way it's working. Aileen McColgan declined to comment.
So that's the unifying theme, is it? It's a loss of faith, fears of incompetency at the top of the inquiry.
Broadly similar concerns. Now, we've had a statement from the inquiry today responding to this story. They say we have a large legal team comprising a number of junior counsel, senior counsel and solicitors. They come and go subject to their professional obligations, and we're not commenting on specifics. The problem for the inquiry is that it was established over 2 years ago and it's yet to take any public evidence. A number of the survivors groups who are engaging with it are getting restless, to say the least. And also, 7 weeks after Ben Emmerson resigned as its lead counsel, there's been no public word yet on a replacement for him.
Jake Morris, thank you very much indeed. Now, today's Brexit news began with reports of a leaked government memo describing a government with no Brexit plan. Later, though, management consultants Deloitte said the memo was an internal document and had nothing to do with the Cabinet Office. Later still, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson reportedly stated that the 1957 Treaty of Rome, which of course laid the foundations of the European Union, made no mention of the free movement of people. Rather awkwardly, Article 3C of that 1957 Treaty of Rome reads, and I quote, "The activities of the community shall include, as provided in this treaty and in accordance with the timetable set out therein, the abolition as between member states of obstacles to freedom of movement for persons, services and capital." To provide a perspective from inside the outside, so to speak, I'm joined now by Jeroen Dijsselbloem, the Dutch Minister of Finance and President of the Eurogroup. Jean-Claude Juncker has described, I'll begin in America, as we were a moment ago, described that election campaign as absolutely disgusting. Boris Johnson, who I've just mentioned there, has already described people complaining about the election of Donald Trump as indulging in some sort of windorama. Which of those descriptions is closer to your position?
Neither, I would say. I think that...
You can't be smack in the middle of the two, can you?
I think the campaign has been addressing the real concerns of American people very, very little. And the real concerns we saw in the documentary about the Midwest and the mining communities. And I don't think that... my greatest concern is that the outcome of all of this is that they will be even more disappointed.
And to refer back to our Foreign Secretary, we're quite familiar with Boris Johnson. He is someone with whom you could be negotiating in the not-too-distant future. How does his act strike you?
Well, I think he's offering to the British people options that are really not available. For example, to say we could be inside the internal market, keep full access to the internal market, but be outside the customs union. This is just impossible. It doesn't exist. The opposite does exist. Turkey is, we have a customs union with Turkey, but Turkey is not part of the internal market. So he's saying things that are intellectually impossible, politically unavailable. So I think he's not offering the fair approach that the British people gives a fair view of what is ahead and what is available and what can be achieved in these negotiations.
What is ahead? What can be achieved?
Well, it's going to be, there is no win-win situation.
What's the best case scenario for Britain?
It's going to be a lose-lose situation, and in the best case, if we set aside all emotions and try to work out an agreement which is least damaging to both of us, we can sort of minimize the damages for the UK economy and for the European economy. But it's going to be a worse-off situation than where we are now. Britain and the British companies and international companies in the UK have full access to the European markets without any hindrance or custom duties, etc., etc. And some of that will disappear. So we can do our best to minimize damages, but it's going to be a step back. And that is the honest truth. That is what Boris Johnson should start talking about.
And when you say lose-lose, you refer obviously to both sides in negotiations coming out worse off than they went into them. I think the Dutch budget watchdog has estimated a cost of about 10 billion euros if a hard Brexit is pursued. So is it not in your country's economic interest to perhaps allow a softer Brexit, to allow some of perhaps Boris Johnson's more manageable dreams to be realised?
Well, you know, it would be in my country's interest and in the European and British interest if the Brits would stay in the EU.
I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen either. So then the next best option is to have as good agreement as possible, but the UK will be outside the internal market and there will be some hindrances. The full free movement within the internal market can only be available if the UK also accepts the other freedoms of Europe, including migration within Europe.
A slight suggestion from Mrs. Merkel today that there might be some wriggle room on that. The notion that, I don't speak German, but her words seem to be along the lines of people shouldn't be able to work for a small period of time and then live off with the welfare state or off benefits for the rest of their lives in a country that's not their country of birth. Is that perhaps a sign of softening on her part?
No, I don't think so. I think that that kind of policy is already, in most countries, the practice. In the UK, on some tax benefits, it was not the practice. But that was a very typical UK situation, how to deal with migrants and labour migrants in the UK economy. In almost other countries, you cannot immediately or after a short period of time access social benefits. So that is already practiced in Germany, is already practiced in France or in the Netherlands. And the UK could change its tax policies and change that. But they didn't choose that. They chose to step out of the EU, then say, well, we still want full access to the internal market. We cannot accept the other freedoms of Europe. And that option is not available.
So what do you think Brexit means, very briefly, if you would? We know that it means Brexit, by the way.
It's in economic and political terms going to be a lose-lose situation, and the only thing we can do is to try to minimise the damage to our economies and to our people.
Jeroen Dijsselbloem, many thanks indeed. Now, back to events across the pond and a question that's been bothering a lot of people. Did the pollsters call it all as badly as many people are saying? In order to provide a definitive overview of just how poorly or how well the profession performed throughout this most unpredictable of presidential campaigns, we've asked 1,000 people whether they felt that American pollsters had... No, we didn't. We asked Newsnight's Chris Cook to crunch the numbers and show his working out.
Is there a path to victory for Donald Trump at this point?
No. Last Tuesday was bad for the Democratic Party, but worse for the pollsters.
That's uphill. He's still coming from behind, and he's got to not be diverted.
Dr. Wong, you tweeted recently that you were so sure of the result that you'd put it up on the screen, eat a bug, if Donald Trump pulled this thing out.
The Democrats and the pollsters' problems, though, were both made much worse by the US electoral system. The US election is not a straight race between the two candidates to just get the most votes. Each state and Washington, D.C. get a quota of delegates to the so-called Electoral College. And to win, the candidates have to carry enough states, not just win the popular vote.
Hillary Clinton would win the election if it was held today.
The problem is that the pollsters got the popular vote roughly right, but they got the Electoral College dramatically wrong. This is a number line. Each dot represents a US state or Washington, D.C., and the dots are placed on the line according to how many people in those areas voted Republican in 2012. So, at the very left, we have Washington, D.C., where Mitt Romney took just 7%. On the very far right is Wyoming, where Romney took 71% of the vote. Now, let's move the dots so you can see what pollsters expected this time round. Where the dots go up, it means that pollsters expected Trump to beat Romney's totals. Where the dots go down, it means they expected Trump to lose ground on Romney. So you can see a trend. Pollsters expected Trump to beat Romney in Democratic areas at the left of the graph and to lose ground in Republican areas on the right of the graph.
Numbers are looking phenomenal in Florida. Don't believe the media.
Some people were always skeptical about these numbers, including one UK pollster.
The state polls inferred that Donald Trump was doing less well amongst the white working class than Mitt Romney in Republican heartlands like Wyoming and Idaho, and appeared to be doing better in places like DC and California than Mitt Romney had 4 years previously. And to me, that seemed contrary to the core appeal of Donald Trump.
So this then is what the pollsters were expecting. This though is how the votes actually shook out. It's not just that Trump won more votes than the pollsters expected, the votes fell in totally different places. So he picked up Ohio, which was supposed to be a close race, and Florida too. But also Wisconsin, Pennsylvania and Michigan, where the polls had implied comfortable Clinton wins. That alone was enough to win the Electoral College.
I think the errors are quite strongly correlated with the numbers of white working class people there are in each state. In other words, the errors are very sensitive to it. So in areas like California and other safe democratic states, there were huge misses where the polls overestimated Donald Trump's votes. And actually in safe Republican heartlands, which are full of white working class voters, they underestimated his vote.
Several states saw polling errors bigger than the UK's in 2015. And thanks to the Electoral College, it's that, not total vote share, that matters. So yes, America didn't have one huge 2015-style error this year. It had several of them. all running in parallel.